Georgie boy had lots of big ambitions, in spite of something funny in his past, which Georgie boy here turned into a novel. His first attempt and also his last. Hey! I rhymed!
Yeah, you're right. Go on.
Today, we're going to be talking about directors yet again. And we're going to be talking about directors doing something that's very specific and very, very difficult. And that is taking something that began life as a stage play and moved into the world of feature films. As you remember from taking a look at Plaza Suite, you had something that was very, very theatrical. That it was all about people talking, and it wasn't really cinematically that interesting. And even though it was more realistic in the Walter Matthau Grant version, it still nonetheless didn't quite feel like a film. It did feel like a film stage play, to say nothing of the way the Carol Burnett show did it, which was almost like an extended skit. So it's really not a successful example of a really, really good adaptation. And it took me a while to decide which film to use for this, because there's so many different choices where it's done right. And then I decided to show Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, because it sits not only as a prime example of doing an adaptation of a stage show to the screen, but how to take a piece of source material that's very good and very strong and very specific in what it's doing and make it work in an even more exciting way by utilizing the technique of film to their fullest extent. And what do I mean by that? Well, Edward Albee's play was a sensation on Broadway, but it all took place within one room. And while, as we've seen in Scenes from a Marriage, that's not necessarily the biggest challenge that you've ever had. But when you shoot something that is that kind of a chamber play, you have to find some way to translate the language of the stage into the language of film. And there's a big problem with that. And that is the position of dialogue is almost totally different. Now, we wouldn't think that because, after all, aren't movies like stage shows just hearing people talk and conveying the message from the dialogue? In film, the message does not come from the words. The message instead comes from the reactions. And so therefore, sometimes very great plays, when they're adapted to the screen, lose their vitality, because all we're doing is we're focused on the words, and we, as being intimate viewers who are right up front and center with the actors, don't have that separation that you have on the stage, where even at row E center, you're at a distance, you're spying on them. But because we're now in the middle of them, we know what's happening. We get the emotion from the actor's face. So there's nothing left for us to learn. So if they're going through a very, very long soliloquy, then we're totally out of it, because we got it. We know what they're talking about. And that's why it's important to capture what the reaction is and how to give that sense that you're in the middle of everything. Now, Mike Nichols, when he directed Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, it was his first film. And he had a big challenge with it, because not only was it his first film, but he was dealing with Hollywood's biggest star at that time, who was unquestionably Elizabeth Taylor. She had been the first actress to be paid over $1 million to be in a movie, and that was Cleopatra. And she was known as being this very beautiful woman, and she just had two incredibly scandalous love affairs, first with Eddie Fisher and then with Richard Burton on the set of Cleopatra. And Eddie Fisher, of course, ultimately divorced his wife, Debbie Reynolds, he's Carrie Fisher's dad, to marry Liz after her husband had been killed in a plane crash. So she was known as this kind of femme fatale and very big and larger than life. Not necessarily a great actress. And here you had Edward Albee, who required on the stage Uta Hagen, one of the great actresses and one of the great acting teachers. And so the thought of putting Elizabeth Taylor, who was 34, in this role of a woman who's supposed to not only be 52, but a 1960s-style, very ragged 52. And it's like, what are you doing? But producer Ernest Lehman, who had just come off of The Sound of Music, knew exactly. He had his commercial instincts correct, because he knew that the presence of Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, so opposite of what they were used to be seeing as, was going to make the difference. And it did. First of all, when you think that this is only 3 years out of Cleopatra, it's actually a mind blow. And the movie right before it was The Sandpiper, where again Elizabeth Taylor is an ephemeral, gorgeous creature, and she put on a little bit of weight, and she kind of wore this salt and pepper hair wig, and she's giving a liberating performance. Mike Nichols liberated the real Liz. The thing about Taylor is that Taylor was one of those people who's a movie star as opposed to a great actress. There's always these debates: what's better, to be a star or be an actor? I tend to fall on it's much more satisfying to be a star, because then you're just a fantastic spectacle every time you're on the screen just for being you. And even if you say a line wrong, it doesn't matter because it's still right. And Taylor tends to be that way. And what Mike Nichols did is he unleashed in her a side of her that had been absent from all of her MGM movies, from Butterfield 8, from all these other things that she had done. And that was her anger. Taylor, beneath her beautiful exterior, always had this restrained sense that she was angry. And maybe she's angry at the world because she is beautiful. Maybe she's angry at the world because people took advantage of her beauty. Maybe she's angry at the world simply because her health and everything else was always going wrong. But that anger was unleashed in Virginia Woolf. And that anger in Virginia Woolf is what Mike Nichols caught. Now, Edward Albee, the playwright, hated the movie. Hated it. And he never stopped complaining about it, even though, let's get real, it wouldn't have really been revived into at least the 80s if it hadn't been for the movie. The movie has such a huge shadow to it. And the reason Albee hated it was because his play was kind of sort of early gay theater where at least 3 of the characters in it are guys, and I'm going to say that it is a heterosexual younger couple who come into this thing, but it was clearly kind of 2 old gay guys who are living together, and they play games and all of that, and it was sort of supposed to be played almost as if it was a Neil Simon comedy. It was Albee's style of absurdist play, and he felt that Liz totally missed the point. And I think this is where sometimes playwrights don't know what they've really done, because what Elizabeth Taylor did is she added comprehension to the character. We know why George stays with Martha. He stays with Martha because she's Elizabeth Taylor, and that's reason enough. So the movie gets inside of you. It was shot by Haskell Wexler, and it used all sorts of handheld camera and documentary filmmaking techniques that hadn't really been done in a big budget film, and boy, was this a big budget. I know it's going to be really amazing for you all to think this, but Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf cost more to make than The Longest Day. It cost more to make than The Sound of Music. And it only has 4 characters and 2 walk-ons in a diner scene. How could it cost that much money? It was roughly the equivalent of something costing like $150 million today. And yet, it's all above the line. And that means the creative talent, in its own way, kind of is worth it.
What actor? What star?
I can't remember his name, for gosh sake. What's the name of the picture? I want to know what the name of the picture is.